Alexander Lukashenko thought he could play games. On October 24th, the dictator of Belarus launched a quiet, hybrid attack against Lithuania, using weather balloons carrying contraband. He expected confusion. He expected hesitation. Instead, he got a blockade. Lithuania didn't just shoot down the balloons, it slammed the border shut. In one decisive move, Vilnius trapped tens of millions of dollars of cargo, paralyzed Belarus's export routes to the sea, and sent a shockwave all the way to Beijing. This is the story of how a small NATO nation turned a simple border incident into a massive strategic victory, bringing a dictator to his knees without firing a single shot. But why did Lithuania react so aggressively to a few balloons? And how does this local standoff threaten to redraw the trade map of Eurasia? Before we dissect this masterclass in modern deterrence, remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't find this depth of geopolitical analysis on the evening news. First, let's establish the why. To understand Lithuania's reaction, you have to understand its geography. It is a country living in a permanent state of high alert. To the west, it has allies in NATO and the EU. But to the east lies Belarus, a Russian client state. And to the north sits Kaliningrad, a heavily militarized Russian exclave packed with Iskander missiles. Lithuania is the filling in a dangerous sandwich. It guards the Suwalki Gap, a narrow 60-mile strip of land that is the only land connection between the Baltic states and the rest of NATO. For years, military planners have called this the most dangerous place on Earth. Russian and Belarusian Zapad military exercises have practiced sealing this gap shut. So, for Lithuania, the border isn't just a line on a map. It is the front line of survival. This brings us to October 24th. It started innocently enough. Lithuanian border guards detected a series of meteorological balloons drifting across from Belarus. At first glance, it looked like simple smuggling. When they intercepted them, they found illegal cigarettes. But the pattern was wrong. These weren't random drifters. They were launched in coordinated waves, often at night, and frequently near sensitive military zones and airports. They disrupted civilian flights at Vilnius and Kaunas international airports. The Lithuanian government realized this wasn't just crime, it was a test. It was a hybrid attack designed to probe their air defenses, waste their interceptor missiles, and sow confusion. Lukashenko was using the classic Russian playbook: plausible deniability. If Lithuania did nothing, he would escalate. If they shot them down with expensive missiles, they would look weak and wasteful. But Lithuania chose option C, total economic war. The National Crisis Management Center announced the indefinite closure of border crossings with Belarus. The gates at Salchininkai and Medininkai were locked. This is where the story shifts from a border skirmish to an economic catastrophe for Lukashenko. Let's look at the why it matters, the money. Smuggling cigarettes isn't just a side hustle in Belarus. It is a state industry. The Minsk capital tobacco factory in Grodno churns out 20 billion cigarettes a year. Half are sold legally. The other half are smuggled into the EU, avoiding taxes and generating an estimated $1.5 billion in black cash annually for Lukashenko's inner circle and his secret police. By closing the border, Lithuania didn't just stop the balloons. It cut off the cash flow that pays the regime's enforcers. But the pain went much deeper than cigarettes. Belarus is a landlocked country. Its economy depends on Lithuanian ports, specifically Klaipėda, to export its heavy goods, potash fertilizer, timber, and machinery, to the world. Klaipėda handles nearly 30% of Belarus's foreign cargo. When the border closed, that lifeline was severed. Within days, satellite images showed queues of trucks stretching for kilometers into Belarus. Fertilizer plants missed their shipping windows. Timber rotted in warehouses. Logistics firms reported losses exceeding 1.2 million euros in a single week. Lukashenko tried to retaliate, banning Lithuanian trucks from entering Belarus. But this was a massive self-own. Lithuania has other options. It can trade with Poland, Latvia, and the EU. Belarus has only Russia, and shipping goods through the overloaded, expensive Russian rail network to distant ports like St. Petersburg adds weeks and massive costs to every shipment. The blockade was so effective that it even shook the giants in Beijing. The Middle Corridor and the Northern Route of China's Belt and Road Initiative rely on rail transit through Belarus and Lithuania to reach Europe. When the border closed, Delivery times for Chinese goods stretched by a week. Insurance premiums for cargo transiting Belarus skyrocketed by 20%. This forced China to recalculate. Beijing values stability above all else. A route that can be shut down by a dictator playing with balloons is not a stable route. Reports indicate that Chinese logistics firms have already begun talks to shift their rail hubs to Poland, Astravyets, and bypass the unpredictable Belarusian route entirely. Lithuania has effectively begun to redraw the trade map of Eurasia, isolating Belarus not just from the west, but potentially from the east as well. Strategically, Lithuania's move was a game changer for NATO. It proved that you don't need to fire a shot to win a hybrid war, you just need resolve. The balloon provocation forced NATO to take hybrid aerial threats seriously. It accelerated the creation of the Baltic Defense Line, a coordinated network of sensors, drones, and physical fortifications along the borders of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Finland, citing Lithuania's example, boosted its own drone patrols along its 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. The message to Moscow was clear. If you use hybrid tactics, migrants, balloons, cyber attacks, we won't play your game. We will simply shut you out. And what about the internal reaction? In a rare moment of unity, Lithuania's political spectrum, from the ruling party to the opposition, backed the closure. Even the exiled Belarusian opposition leader, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, supported the move, recognizing it as a blow against the regime, not the people. For the ordinary Lithuanian, there is a cost. Businesses in border towns have lost customers. Transport companies have had to reroute through Poland, adding costs. But approval for the government's tough stance sits at around 68%. The people understand the stakes. They remember 1991. They know that sovereignty isn't free. So what happens next? As of November, the border remains closed with no reopening date in sight. Lukashenko is trapped in a corner of his own making. If he backs down and stops the provocations, he looks weak to his masters in Moscow. If he continues, his economy bleeds out, and factory workers in Grodno, already facing wage delays, might start asking dangerous questions. Russia is watching from the wings. Moscow could pressure Belarus to escalate, perhaps through cyber attacks on Lithuania's energy grid or transport sector. But Lithuania has prepared for this too, recently joining NATO's Cyber Defense Center. Every option for escalation carries the risk of drawing NATO in deeper, something Russia, bogged down in Ukraine, can ill afford. This crisis has exposed a fundamental truth of modern conflict. Strength isn't always about the size of your army. It's about the clarity of your red lines. Lithuania drew a line in the sand. When Lukashenko crossed it, they didn't send a diplomatic note, they locked the gate. By turning a few drifting balloons into a geopolitical blockade, Lithuania has written a new rulebook for deterrence. It has shown the world that in the face of a bully, the most powerful weapon isn't a missile. It's the courage to say no and the will to enforce it. But to truly understand the gravity of Lithuania's decision, we must look beyond the balloons and the trucks. There is a darker, more menacing shadow looming over Vilnius, one that makes this border closure a matter of existential survival, not just trade policy. That shadow is the Astravyets nuclear power plant. Built by Russia's state atomic agency, Rosatom, and funded by Kremlin loans, this massive nuclear facility sits just 40 kilometers from the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius. It is visible from the city's taller buildings on a clear day. For years, Lithuania has viewed this plant not as an energy project, but as a geopolitical weapon, a nuclear gun held to its head. By closing the border, Lithuania is signaling that it is no longer afraid of Lukashenko's nuclear blackmail. The logic is chilling but clear. If Belarus is reckless enough to send uncontrolled balloons into NATO airspace, who is to say they won't accidentally allow a safety incident at a nuclear plant right on the NATO border? By sealing the crossings, Lithuania is imposing a quarantine zone, limiting the movement of any potential saboteurs or maintenance crews that might be used to weaponize the plant's operations as part of a hybrid threat. This creates a terrifying dilemma for Moscow. If Lukashenko escalates too far and uses the nuclear plant as a pawn, he invites a NATO response that could decapitate his regime. But if he does nothing, the plant, intended to sell electricity to Europe, becomes a white elephant, a massive debt trap generating power that no one in the West will buy. And there is another pressure point that the Kremlin is desperate to hide: the Kaliningrad chokehold. While we focus on Belarus, we must remember that Lithuania holds the keys to Russia's most militarized outpost, Kaliningrad. The home of the Baltic Fleet and nuclear-capable Iskander missiles, relies heavily on rail transit through Lithuania to receive supplies from mainland Russia. By demonstrating its willingness to completely shut down the Belarusian border, Vilnius is sending a coded message directly to Putin: we control the switch. If Lithuania can lock out Belarus over balloons, it can technically squeeze the transit corridor to Kaliningrad over safety concerns. This is Putin's strategic nightmare. A full blockade of Kaliningrad would force Russia to supply the enclave entirely by sea through the Baltic, a sea that, since the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, has effectively become a NATO lake. This explains why the Kremlin's reaction has been surprisingly muted. Moscow knows that Lithuania has escalation dominance here. Any kinetic retaliation by Russia against Lithuania could trigger Article 5. But any hybrid retaliation, like cyber attacks, could push Lithuania to restrict Kaliningrad transit. Putin is checkmated by geography. Furthermore, the internal clock is ticking for Lukashenko. The border closure has started a countdown within his own security apparatus. The KGB and the OMON riot police depend on the cash flow from Minsk capital, smuggling and potash exports to pay their salaries. Dictatorships do not run on loyalty, they run on money. If the border stays closed for 6 months, the cash reserves required to pay the enforcers will dry up. We are already seeing reports of discontent in the Grodno and Brest regions, where the local economy is entirely dependent on cross-border trade. A hungry police force is a disloyal police force. Lithuania knows this. They aren't just starving the economy, they are starving the regime's capacity for repression. Ultimately, this is a lesson in total defense. Lithuania has shown that in the 21st century, the distinction between civilian and military defense has vanished. A customs officer locking a gate is just as effective as a soldier firing a missile. A disrupted train schedule damages the enemy as much as a destroyed bridge. This crisis is the final nail in the coffin of the post-Soviet order in Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain has not just descended again, it has been welded shut by Lithuania. The buffer zone is gone. The gray zone is gone. There is now only the line between the free world and the dictator's cage. So, as we watch the empty trucks and the silent border posts, we are witnessing history being made. A small nation has looked a nuclear-armed bully in the eye and refused to blink. How this standoff ends will determine the security architecture of Europe for the next decade. Will Lukashenko crumble under the economic pressure? Will Putin risk a war to reopen the trade routes? Or will this new ice wall become the permanent frontier of NATO? If you found this analysis valuable, please like the video and share it. It helps us break through the algorithm and bring you the truth about these critical flashpoints. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.